thanks for having us in the first place. We're both really happy to be here with you today to talk about the changes that the LAI Cataloguing and Metadata group successfully made to the most recent edition of the Dewey Decimal and Classification Index, or DDC 23 for short, with regard to Irish travellers. So I'm Ruth, and I'm a collections and content librarian in Maynooth, and Dean is an assistant librarian and head of cataloguing and collections at Griffith College. We're both committee members of the LAI Cataloguing and Metadata group, and with thanks to them for letting us come here to represent them as well. So what do we want to do today? We just want to give you an overview of the processes involved in revising the DDC to provide a more precise and inclusive description of Irish travellers. But why did we seek to make this change in the first instance? One of the primary goals of the Cataloguing and Metadata group is to promote best practice in all aspects of library resource description in order to ensure more equitable access to accurate and relevant information for all library users. And you probably have heard of some of our projects that we've done, and the most recent being the work on the successful addition of classification numbers for Gaelic games to Dewey. So the work that went into that application kind of spurred us on to make further changes to Dewey, because we saw it could be done. Because one of the big things for us was it seemed really intimidating to try and make a change to Dewey. Like, how are we going to do this? So we saw that it could be done with the work that was previously done on the Gaelic Games project. But why specifically Irish travellers? Well, it was thanks to one of our committee members, Patricia, who kind of encouraged us to look at this area. And I'm going to just quote what we put on our application to explain why we felt we needed Dewey to make these changes. So we said, Irish travellers, also known as Mincéiries or Pavies, are an indigenous ethnic minority community based primarily in Ireland and Great Britain. Throughout their history, Irish travellers have been segregated from the general Irish population. And this has resulted in widespread discrimination and a lasting stereotyping that endures to this day. And I think the main point is the current treatment for Irish travellers in the DDC 23 is somewhat reflective of this, in that works about this group are frequently misclassified. And moreover, Irish travellers are not explicitly mentioned in the current DDC. So what we were able to show is that classification in DDC 23 for Irish travellers was inconsistent, inaccurate, and exclusionary. The Library of Congress subject heading had mapped the group to Table 5 under Celts, 916 Celts, but Irish travellers weren't specifically mentioned in the DDC, which came as a surprise for us, and is kind of what spurred us on to do something like this project. What they were classed as were nomads, alienated and excluded classes, and again you can see here how it's perpetuating the more general societal stereotypes about the group. And we were encouraged to rectify this issue not only by library colleagues, but also by traveller representative groups as well. And we contacted these groups in advance of putting in our application for their advice. And we were really struck by their responses and how enthusiastic they were about this project. And there was a particular response from the Irish Traveller movement that we really liked. And they emphasised the fact that it was only in 2017 that Irish travellers were given state recognition as an ethnic group in the Republic of Ireland. And they also drew our attention to the committee debates surrounding the adoption of the capitalisation of the letter T in traveller. And this happened in 1999. And specifically, they drew our attention to the opinion of the then Deputy Michael G. Higgins when discussing this proposal. And he said this change was a small but significant one for a group which identifies itself as a distinct cultural and ethnic group. So the Cataloguing and Metadata group felt that our proposed changes to the DDC would be another very small step towards removing one of the many barriers, in this case access to accurate information by and about Irish travellers. Dean will look in a little bit more detail about the actual changes we made, but I just want to give you a brief overview of the steps involved in getting an exhibit or application together to help make these changes. So, preparing our exhibit. The first step was to email the Dewey editorial committee, just outlining our aim for the proposed revision to the DDC in relation to Irish travellers. At that point, we just really wanted to get their viewpoint on whether it was worthwhile doing it. And for anyone who doesn't know, the Dewey editors publish draft proposals or exhibits, and they submit these to the editorial policy committee for their review. And the purpose of the Editorial Policy Committee is to make recommendations to OCLC with respect to the editorial policy for Dewey. The response, and I'm not exaggerating, was immediate and really positive. Alex Kyrgios, who's a senior editor with Dewey, said our timing was impeccable as he was working on a project to address the use of the pejorative gypsies in the DDC. And the only thing they asked us at that point was what our timelines might be, and then he offered an awful lot of help to us as we were going through the process. One of the main things Alex did for us was he provided access to documentation about the ways to contribute to reviewing and proposing changes to the DDC. And what was great for both of us to see was how encouraging OCLC are to people who are interested in suggesting changes and revisions to the DDC, with the specific purpose of making it more transparent, inclusive and responsive to community needs. So, for example, at the same time we were working on our proposal, as I said, Alex was working on the proposal in relation to terms like gypsies, but also there was other proposals about terms to do with slavery and things like that. So you felt like you were part of a community making these changes. And within the documentation Alex sent on, there was also a link to a website created by the Dewey Editorial Committee with a checklist of how an exhibit is made and examples of recent exhibits as well. And we put a link to this on the final slide. So we were armed with an awful lot of information, and then we were able to begin preparing the exhibit itself. And on this slide here, we've just included the exhibit template that OCLC provide, and this is what we used. We began with the main body section because we could collate this information ourselves, and we didn't need input from OCLC at this point. And just to run through what the document says, it says a good exhibit should cover most or all of the following: current coverage of the area and why it needs improvement. Well, we had a lot of examples for that. Trends in literature. Are there works being misclassed? Yes. Were we able to give numerous examples of this? Yes, we were. And then other examples they might give were crowded classes that could use some expansion. And then they asked how the subject is treated in other knowledge organisation systems, either general, so Library of Congress, or subject-specific. And so we noted that the Library of Congress subject heading for the group was mapped. What our proposed changes were going to be, and then we had to give some definition and context as well. We decided to start with a definition and context to give some shape to our proposal. And we were able to provide background information obtained from traveller groups and academics working in this area. And the passion these people brought to the subject was really great to see and really interesting for us. They were very encouraging of the libraries making these changes. Their information they gave included information on language, so Shelta and its dialects, and even using terms like Mincéirí and what's the pluralised form and where it comes from, things we'd never thought about before, which was really helpful. And we also took data from the 2016 census that showed there were 32,000 travellers in Ireland in 2016 and 15,000 in Britain. We noted that while the Irish state recognised them as a distinct ethnic group, Irish travellers continued to be segregated from the general Irish population. And we argued that this was reflected in how works on Irish travellers were classified in Dewey. So that was our background, and that was our reason for taking on the project. And then we had to move on to literary warrant. And we were able to provide examples of trends in literature and give many instances of where works on Irish travellers were being misclassed. We easily met the 23 title threshold that the Dewey Editorial Committee asked for to justify consideration of a revised Dewey number. And just a keyword search for Irish travellers in WorldCat gave us over 700 hits. Hopefully you can see on the slide here the subject headings and class numbers that Irish travellers were catalogued at or classified at before our changes. So you can see there was Nomads Ireland, Alienated and Excluded Classes Ireland, and Romanese Ireland. So we argued that this treatment was both inaccurate and exclusionary and perpetuated a discriminatory outlook on the traveller community. So then our job was to recommend a new class number and proper terminology to use in the DDC. And this is where OCLC, the Irish Traveller Representative Groups, and our colleagues, both within the Cataloguing and Metadata Group and the wider library community, stepped in to help us. And Dean's going to talk you through that process.
Hello. So I'm going to go through the process of getting the draft exhibit together and some of the technical details for the classification number. I know catalogue and classification can be quite dry topic for 99% of the global population, but if you're in that 1% that enjoys it, you should find this exhilarating. So, and if you're not, I hope it's informative. So our initial conversations with Alex really centred around terminology, getting the right terminology, and there was two initial issues of discussion that crept up. The first was, is the term Irish travellers itself offensive? And secondly, are Irish travellers actually of Irish ancestral origin? Because it would have had, it would be important for its eventual placement in Table 5. Or in the tables, rather. So I suppose we kind of conducted essentially a literature review, kind of looked at what was out there, what was written by actual scholars in Irish traveller studies. We found that the word or the phrase Irish travellers is used and largely accepted by the Irish traveller community, and we found significant evidence that demonstrably proved that Irish travellers are genetically and ancestrally Irish. So that was really the initial kind of hashing out that we would have done with Alex. The next issue that kind of came up, it was kind of one after the other that kept growing and growing, but the next one was, should the Irish language equivalent be used? Which would be Mincéirí, Mincéirs, Pavis. There's several terms. Mincéir and Mincéirí would also be the Irish traveller language equivalent. It's also known as Shelta or Cant or Gammon. Which also led to another discussion of whether they should be included. And we also looked at how Irish travellers are represented in other classification systems. We did decide to use the Shelta, or the Irish language equivalent for Irish travellers, and purely because there's precedence for it in Dewey. For example, the Welsh, for Welsh people, I don't know if there's any Welsh speakers here, probably not, is included. It's Cymru. So we just felt it was precedent. We felt it was more inclusive, better representative of Irish travellers, so we wanted to include it. So this took a couple of months back and forth between myself, Ruth, and Alex. So eventually we submitted our first draft to the editorial policy committee. Alex himself done the mock-up changes in their software, and he drafted it into Dewey's, his term, and he decided on the number that they were going to use based on the information that we had given him in the draft. I suppose this is the step we were most unsure of and kind of intimidated by, because I guess you're effectively changing the global system, which sounds more intimidating actually now than I say it. But Alex was a major help here. He kind of took care of all that, and the OCLC, and effectively this is where his expertise kind of came in. So yeah, he was really helpful there. Our next step after when we drafted the exhibit was to go back to our CNG colleagues, just let them know how we're getting on. We had been in touch with them, but when we submitted the draft exhibit, this was it was kind of an important step in retrospect because it changed the terminology again. In our draft exhibit we had used the term Mincéirí when the actual term should be Mincéirí, which would be the plural. So from a grammatical standpoint, this was a pretty significant aspect. And during this time as well, we also got kind of recommendations of who we could contact in the traveller community, kind of various stakeholders and groups. So just before we submitted the final draft, I think it was kind of like really important. When we went back to kind of advocates in the traveller community, we tried to engage with as many people as possible. Kind of like a multidisciplinary approach. We contacted various advocacy and outreach groups like the Irish Traveller Movement, Pavy Point. We ended up kind of just built. We ended up contacting linguists, scholars in traveller studies, traveller outreach officers, charities, outreach groups. I don't know how many people we contacted in total, but it was a lot. But it was important as well. Like it's a significant change, I think, to Dewey, and a worthwhile one. So we were happy to put in the work for it. When we kind of settled on the final draft, we returned to Alex with the changes, which was the main one was grammatic from Mincéirí to Mincéirí. That was the draft that was submitted. You can see it still has Mincéirí there. That wasn't changed. I'm not sure why. Oh, sorry, excuse me. But really, that's just the draft. It's not totally significant. You can see you might be able to see the table there. I hope everyone has their glasses. That would be the table, and the schedule's there. And the one that everyone will probably look at would be, if you are a cataloger, would be Web Dewey. So you can see the number there, which is linked to Irish people. Technical details, a creation at table 5 of the number 91623 under the term Irish Travellers, parenthesis Mincéirí, where Mincéirí would be in electronic only, index term Mincéirí would be print and electronic. Yeah, that was really the creation. Just kind of a couple of closing remarks. I have two kind of closing remarks. One is on the process itself. I think it took roughly 8 or 9 months. And it was really just time dependent. This was purely voluntary on behalf of Ruth and I and the CMG, the Cataloguing and Metadata group. You could do it quicker depending on the time available. Anyone really can get involved, no matter what level of librarian you're at, whether you're a student to, late stage retiree, anyone should get involved. OCLC were super helpful, super receptive. Any confusion we had was really cleared up and allayed by their expertise, their approachability, their assurance. So I would encourage anyone who feels that the DDC is lacking in representation, and it for sure is, to get involved. Just a kind of closing word on the project itself. Dewey, like most systems, should always be adapting and changing to include as many people as possible. Something introduced in the 1870s isn't going to be the most progressive or inclusive system. And just from what Marilyn was talking about this morning, the 4 R's kind of tied in: recognition, representation, reparation, restitution. Marginalised communities and groups and marginalised groups of people deserve better. They deserve better representation and recognition. Marilyn also spoke about disrupting systems and decolonisation. Dewey itself is in need of decolonisation, and most systems in general. I think this project was very, 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 very small drop in the bucket for hopefully better representation and recognition, and hopefully leads to fairer, more equitable access. Thanks.